Hello, Lakeshore Garden Clubbers. My name is Roy Larick. I have the distinction of being the son of Elizabeth Larick, who was a member of the club from the mid-late 1950s through to near the time she died in 2001. And I have very fond memories of Mother in the garden club, staying away from us a little bit for her responsibilities, but also preparing snacks or other kinds of refreshments for meetings, which my sister and I were able to partake. That was very nice. We'll talk more about that on February 15th when I am with you on a Zoom meeting. Today, I'd like to give you my perspective on Euclid as a place where things grow, basically. The natural Euclid on the Portage Escarpment. And about 20 slides here, about 20 minutes. Let's get going. Naturally speaking, Euclid is a very interesting place. We have, of course, the lake. Not too many other communities have that. Lake with the shoreline. Then we have a lake plain a little higher south of the railroad tracks or the freeway. We have a terrace that's a little different. And then we have the rise above Euclid Avenue, which we call the escarpment. The heights are part of the heights, basically. And for me, all of this is the Portage Escarpment. That is, the lake is cradled by the Portage Escarpment, and it's a series of steps upward from about 570 feet to 800 and some. We have about 300 feet range in elevation, which is high for a place in Ohio. You can compare our range in elevation with that found farther south in Ohio. Ours comes not as steep hills, though, but as a series of steps from the lake up to the top. We have one sharp elevation transition just above Euclid Avenue, and we have a range of what I call habitat substrates. That is what underlies. They range from sand on the beach to bedrock up on the escarpment, and a lot in between. And finally, we have relatively warm, wet winds coming in from the lake that keep us well watered anyway and don't let us get too cold in the winter. Okay. We also have ecological corridors, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. We could say we have 4 terrestrial habitat zones, 4 areas, surfaces that grow things just a little bit differently. On the steeper parts of the escarpment, you see it's highly erosive. Plants don't have a great way of holding on. So sometimes we can have bare environments. They're almost desertic if you look at that upper left picture there. We also have the waterfalls and rock outcrops that create the waterfalls. And these are also kind of bare environments, even though they're wet. And then on the terrace, we have some natural wetlands. You see in the lower left there, a wetland that unfortunately no longer exists. The lake plain is relatively fertile soil and flat, so forests tended to be dense. And then we have the shoreline with beaches that have washed away, although we're beginning to reclaim them with the Euclid Waterfronts Improvements Project. So that's basically how we lie. And if you expand the scale vertically, it looks pretty impressive, doesn't it? From Chardon Road all the way down to Lake Erie. And so if our elevation changes from north to south, we have linear features, channels that tend to go east and west. Along the base of the escarpment, Euclid Avenue is a channel, and humans travel it now. Native Americans did in prehistory. So did all kinds of animals migrating from one end of Lake Erie to the other. We have, of course, the railroads going across the industrial corridor. Those are also channels that parallel movement of plants and animals. Lake plain is similar, and the shoreline is one again. And the colored lines that I have there are what's left of these channels, and they indicate how we could be putting these things together again to make sure that our habitat is linear so that plants and animals can move along these corridors or greenways. This is something that I believe we have to work on within the city. For the next several slides, I'm going to talk about trees. Trees are very important. They, of course, were the main kinds of plants prehistory, we were covered with forests, except for these bare areas on the beach and on the bare slopes. But forests are our natural form of vegetation. And of course, they're almost all gone. Euclid has, I think, 19% urban canopy, we call it these days, so 19% wooded we are. And we could do better. You know, the leafy suburbs to the south of us get up to 26, go to Bentleyville, I think we're up to 40% cover. We have a long way to go to get back to a healthy forest. But we can do it. We're understanding that the urban canopy is very important for keeping the environment healthy and for keeping the humans healthy as well. I speak also as a member of the Euclid Shade Tree Commission, and I feel it my role on the Shade Tree Commission to inform us all about these kinds of things that I'm doing today, the ecological diversity, habitat diversity that we have, and recognize that we'll be better off if we can plant trees or whatever a little differently on the shoreline, lake plain, than what we do on the terrace or the escarpment. And so now this is completely unofficial. I've designed this kind of logo that has two leaves of two kinds of oak trees. One, the chestnut oak that you normally find on the ridge tops, so on our heights on the hill, let's say. And then the kind of oak, the bur oak, that you don't find on steep slopes or really up on the top, but more on the lake plain, on the shoreline. And we still have some magnificent bur oaks left on the lake plain. We have quite a lot of chestnut oaks, but they're in the ravines. They're at the tops of the ravines in Indian Hills and Beverly Hills. Okay, so the way I see it, we have to keep at least two extremes. We have to be cognizant of two environmental extremes in Euclid. One high, one low. High is snowbelt area. The lowland is not. I'll tease these out a little bit. Let's look at the past and present of this a little bit. There's a botanist at Baldwin Wallace University. Her name is Catherine Flynn, and she has studied through the old survey books, including those in Euclid back to 1796, what the old surveyors found in forest cover. They were required to take notes for timber, so they recorded the trees basically. And in looking through those notebooks, she found basically that the forest was almost half composed of beech trees. Now, we have very few beech trees these days in Euclid, but they were the dominant forest tree. And the next one was various kinds of oaks. I just showed you two. And very important, the maples were not so important. And then we have things like chestnuts, the blue castanea, which are gone entirely, and fraxinus is ash, and then other things. Okay. Now, if you compare that with what we have today, now this is in the metro parks, I'm going to show you that maples have dominated. Maple is a tree that adapts well to disturbance. And what do we have in Euclid and throughout Cuyahoga County? Disturbed areas. Urbanizing has, even agriculture disturbs, and so the beech trees don't like when their roots are disturbed. They have a hard time growing back, even from seed, once the land has been disturbed. So maple is the dominant tree, and in Euclid, of course, it's silver maples that were planted to grow quickly, to shade our streets. And we have region-wide very few oaks these days. They have not grown up. Very few beech trees, as you see, and a lot of others, which includes invasive. And the ulmus is elm, and we have very few of those today in 2014, but they're still around. I don't know if you can see a green oval. It seems to go off my screen. I'm sorry about that. A green oval. Anyway, I'm going to talk about, if you can see my cursor. No, you can't see my cursor. Anyway, in the upright, on Upper Valley Drive, Green Creek is the ravine we're going to go to now, where there's a 20-acre ravine that is completely forested. Back in 2015, several of us got a small grant from Dominion Energy, and it was to do an inventory of trees in this 20-acre ravine for Green Creek. And that's, you see Green Road to the west in Cleveland, and then Seminole, Miami, an Upper Valley Drive coming up another ravine. And we had more than a dozen volunteers, and over 3 Saturdays, we measured 1,000 trees. And this is how the species came out, the species count. So you see the most numerous is oak, and that makes this ravine different than what we have generally across the city. Beech, just 46. Cottonwoods down by the water, 46 of those. Maple, 170. So we encountered an oak forest, which is kind of typical for these kinds of ravines that are still forested. They're all second growth forested, but the trees that have grown up are oaks more than maples or beeches. Tulip, if you see there, 39 tulips. That was kind of a surprise that there were that many tulips in this ravine. We can talk about ecosystem services. What does the natural environment do for us, in particular the growing things? So if we have 20 acres with 1,000 trees, there are ways of calculating that amount of biomass can sequester about 18 tons of carbon, and it can absorb about 360,000 gallons of stormwater per year. These are all per year. And if you look at what it would cost to treat that stormwater going into sewers and down to the water treatment plant, that would cost approximately $12,000. So in a very narrow way, we can account for once again, the services, the value that a urban canopy in a place like this gives to us. So let's try to expand on this. That kind of dense tree cover is not only found in the Green Creek Ravine, but in several others, and they're all connected along the face of the escarpment, the Portage Escarpment, the hill above Euclid Avenue. You know, as you drive along, it's all forested, only a few streets, Upper Valley, Beverly Hills, Sherwood Boulevard, cut through that forest. It's a nice place to go up. If you add that all up, there are about 400 acres of dense forest in that part of Euclid. And if you apply those same calculations to this whole 400 acres, as we did for Green Creek, you find that yearly these trees sequester about 360 tons of carbon, and they absorb about 7 million gallons of stormwater for a treatment value, that is not having to treat them, of about $240,000. So again, you can see the importance of the urban canopy. So that is the base. We need to have more trees, and particularly more native trees and shrubs, native shrubs and plants, perennial plants, annual plants. The more of these that we can have that are natives, the better off we are. And I'm going to show you a bit how we can maybe come to do that. One way that we can improve our habitat is to naturalize our lawns. And that's not me lying down behind the lawnmower, but sometimes that's the way I feel about the grass that I have to mow and that I see everybody else does. And if we can get rid of some grass, we can lower our maintenance cost, and in particular get rid of the chemicals that we like to apply. Certainly diversify the species that we have in our yard and garden areas and build habitat. Okay? There are various ways to do this. I'm going to run through slides that have resources on them. This first one has books, commonly available books, and some blogs as well that are adapted to our region here. So books about Ohio, some of them are Northeast Ohio, some of them are about species of pollinators, for example, that thrive anywhere, and it's the pollinators in particular that we should be trying to improve. So all kinds of native plants that are very nice, asters, native goldenrods, and other kinds of plants for attracting pollinators. So once again, books that you can commonly find at Amazon, for example, and these are a lot of fun. Of course, there are all kinds of online resources these days. They tend to come in many forms. Some are better than others, but here are a few here. Now, I know you aren't going to be able to actually get these complicated links on this presentation, so this is the kind of thing that you can email me about, and I'll provide for Deb Kramars, and maybe she can distribute these in a form that you can click on. Okay. I want to mention one here, the second one, Eco-Beneficial Interview with Doug Ptolemy. Some of you may know Doug Ptolemy, who is an academic, and his thing is to really try to get us to convert our yards and gardens into spaces, small habitats that are really oriented toward the kinds of services that I mentioned before. Not so much the big services of sequestering carbon and stormwater, but in attracting a greater diversity of plants and animals, most importantly those pollinators, the birds and the bees. Okay, so Doug Ptolemy is a lot of fun to read. An important, well, it's an alliance. They call themselves the Ecological Landscape Alliance, but it's an online service that covers a number of different resources. Okay, so you can see them, planting for pollinators, blah blah blah. It's a nice hub of resources for planting in our area. And then finally, once you have studied up, thought about what you might like to plant, where do you get the plants and the seeds? So there are more and more each day. People are finding they can do pretty good businesses in supplying seeds and plants, native, and that's only increased with the pandemic, when people turn toward more solitary activities such as improving your garden. Okay, so once again, these things will be made available to you in a way that you can use them better. Finally, I want to talk about rain gardens. And a rain garden is basically a way of collecting runoff from roofs or damp parts of your yard and directing it to a low spot that essentially you irrigate with rainwater, and you can augment that with rain barrels or other kinds of storage mechanisms, and you can they're oriented toward native plants, and they really can be a lot of fun. But what they do more than anything is keep stormwater out of the sewers, and the more we can do that, the easier it is for our sewage treatment plant to handle it all. You know, we've had to spend a whole lot of money. US EPA has told us, the city of Euclid, that we deliver too much polluted stormwater to Lake Erie, and we've got to clean it up. So we're spending all these millions of dollars to have holding tanks and new kinds of processes to treat stormwater before it's let out to the lake. But we can take our own responsibility for doing this by doing rain gardens. Perhaps you have a garage that has a downspout that goes into the sewer system, or it just goes out into the yard, or you don't have a gutter and a downspout on your garage, and it just goes into the environment. That is the best way to begin a rain garden. Here's one. So you see then a couple of downspout runners coming to a low area. A rain garden does not have to be very large, and it can be very large, but basically it's a basin. You construct a basin to sequester the stormwater before it goes into the sewer system. And the fashion of this these days is to fill it with native plants, because with the water that we have, especially in our environment, these things tend to be well watered. You can plant these pollinators that attract an amazing diversity of insects, in particular, and birds as well. Okay, and the little critters like them as well. So, of course, this is not for everyone, but this is a very good way to help in sequestering stormwater and improving local habitat. Now, The great thing in our region is that there are two watershed advocacy groups that have come together to do a Master Rain Gardener class, and that's Cuyahoga Soil and Water Conservation District and then Chagrin River Watershed Partners. And they have been doing this for a couple of years now. They've really perfected it. I have taken their class. I think I paid $50 for it, and I learned so much, and there are resources that are recurring. So if you're at all interested in this, explore the Master Rain Gardener class. Once again, I'll make this available on February 15th. Okay, a lot of fun. I've learned so much and feel so good about establishing my own rain garden. We've come to the end of my, I believe, mercifully short presentation, and I'm passionate about these things. You know, I began with history, shifted over to rocks, and now I've gone to living things in Euclid, and it's very satisfying to make that transition from, you might say, the inorganic to the organic, to that which is just there, to that which functions to our benefit, which we have abused, neglected over the centuries, and we can improve things on an individual basis. So I look forward to talking more about these topics on February 15th and talking a little more about Lakeshore Garden Club history, which I do know a little bit about. Okay, see you soon.